Positive change requires an effort of togetherness. Guided by this statement, the planning team for the Women in Camp Summit, including your Camp Code podcast hosts, committed to designing a virtual event that had the unique feel, bravery, and community similar to their in-person summits of previous years. At the beginning of December, over 200 women from across the world came together for the Women in Camp Summit live virtual event. On today's episode, Beth, Gabs, and I share some of our best lessons learned and favorite moments from the summit.
Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by Go Camp Pro. We've created and are dedicated to this podcast because we believe that staff training is one of, if not the most important part of your job as a camp director. Staff training is what prepares your staff to care for their kids, to feel confident in their skills, to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and to learn along the way. A well thought out and intentional staff training will help you in more ways than you can imagine. And we need to help each other bring our very best. So we're going to begin today by sharing with you who we are. Ruby.
My name is Ruby Compton. I am the Chief Exploration Officer for Ruby Outdoors, a friend and supporter of camp in all ways, shapes, and forms. And I work primarily from my home base in Western North Carolina, just south of Asheville.
Thanks, Ruby. And Gab.
Well, my name's Gabrielle Rail, and I'm one of the camp directors of Camp Waro. And Camp Waro is an all-girls camp in the Laurentian Mountains of Quebec, Canada. And we focus on creating a positive female community, and we do that while speaking in French and in English.
Thanks, Gabs. And I am Beth Allison. I'm co-owner of Camp Hacker and Go Camp Pro. And after 15 years as a camp director, I am now a camp consultant. And my focus is intentional leadership training and helping camps to build that solid, supportive community. So what was just 2 short weeks ago, hard to believe for the three of us, we were honored and privileged to be part of the 3rd annual Women in Camp Summit and our very first virtual summit. And the 2-day live event was followed by our very first Becoming Allies event, which was attended by folks from all gender identities. And it was 3 amazing days of learning for us all. And today we want to pass along to you some of those golden little nuggets of learning that we picked up. So Ruby, would you like to start us off?
Indeed, I do. So my first learning that I want to share is not so much a learning, but a reinforcement. And that is that Leslie Keller of Live, Love, Equity is a smart, smart lady.
Yeah.
And she's really smart. And
so good.
She did a pre-conference session for us kind of about mental health and how women's mental health can be stigmatized. And it just really open, honest, vulnerable conversation, which I so appreciate. And then during the actual summit, she did a session about language matters. And I've seen her give a talk similar to this, and she just continues to expand and grow on her knowledge base. And it was just so good. She did a great job presenting virtually, and that she would put 2 words up on the screen and kind of invite folks to annotate and say, okay, what do you think of with this one? What do you think with this one? What do you think is the better, quote unquote, or like preferred term? And then breaking down those misconceptions. She also, one thing I really appreciated is she shared the factoid that one of the places that she feels like she's getting a lot of learning is from Instagram, and that there are folks who are doing a great job posting on Instagram, this is the population that I'm in. People say these words, like say these words instead. And you've probably seen images like that. Even the Women in Camp Summit, we kind of took our, who are we for? We took that phrase from an Instagram account and adapted some language that they had used. And she mentioned that specific Instagram account. And I was like, yeah, that's so great. So obviously you have to be careful and kind of vet those things. You can't just, take it on blind faith. But it was nice to hear her unpack some of this stuff. She did it very authentically, non-judgmentally, and that's every experience I've had with Leslie, both as a speaker, but also one-on-one, just talking to her informally. She always comes to those conversations so hearts forward. but also just very willing to learn alongside you. And I'm so appreciative of that. I'm so appreciative she continues to be a part of the summit and part of our community. And you should look up her company, Live, Love, Equity. They're doing cool stuff. And anything that she's looking into and learning about, like, I want to learn alongside her, because it's an enjoyable experience and some cool aha moments.
Thanks, Ruby. And she obviously really made an impact, because I'm going to talk about her a little bit later too, and some of the things that she taught us. Gabs, what have you got for your first round?
Well, I had the opportunity to work with two of my staff members in presenting a session titled "White Privilege: How to Talk About Race with Your Staff," and this was a unique experience because these two staff members, though they were on leadership team with me this summer, they didn't have the typical summer. There was no campers. There wasn't really staff to lead as well as a skeleton team. And so for them, this was their first time running a session. And so I got to spend time with them, learn more about them, how they work. And the way we approach this, both women or women of color, there was a shift where I invited them into this conversation and made it very clear that I can take on as much of the work as they would like, or as little of the work. And throughout the working process of building the session, bit by bit, they took on more of the presenting piece, which made me so happy. I did an intro and an outro. And I think one of the things that I get from camp directors a lot is, particularly when we presented this session, was as a white person, how do we talk about this? I don't want to speak in the place of somebody of color, but I also want to do the work. How do we do this? And one of the things that I learned with both Mel and Anya this summer, and we learned together awkwardly, is that there needs to be a little bit of a process of consent and consult before you talk about white privilege with your people of color on staff. If you don't have people of color on staff, then we need to start, and you need to get informed. And one of the things that Anya had talked about was inaction is much worse than trying something that fails and learning from it. So that's sort of the mantra moving forward. You're going to make mistakes, and you have to obviously take responsibility for those mistakes. But white privilege is extremely important to talk about, and this is it's just the tip of the iceberg. And another piece that I really liked that Mel had brought up was letting your staff members know that there's a process to change, and bringing your staff members in on what does that process look like. And she had broken it down into 4 categories. I'm just looking for it now, it was so good. So basically, awareness that there is an issue, assessment of how long it would take to deal with this piece, and prioritizing. So prioritizing what pieces need to be dealt with first. So if you have a bunch of cabins on camp that need to be renamed, make sure that you're putting that forward and you're taking care of it, of course. But chances are that it's not just a cabin issue. There's a staff training issue. There's maybe language on your website. So prioritize what you're going to be doing, but involve your staff in this conversation. Don't do it all by yourself. Personally, it was such a wonderful experience. I'm very privileged to have these staff members that are open with me and are also comfortable pointing out when I'm misstepping. And I hope that as a camp director, I can role model saying sorry. And that's what we want to do for our staff as camp directors, say, hey, I messed up, so that when your staff mess up, they can do the same thing. But there was a lot of talk about privilege, I think, at the Women in Camp Summit, and there was a lot of talk about equity. And it was, to be honest, so motivating and inspiring. And it came from a place of, we can do this together, but we need to have these tough conversations. And then beyond those tough conversations, we need to put things into action. It's not just about talking. So let's talk first, but make sure that action is not too far behind. And that presentation that we did is available. So if anybody would like to use that presentation in their camp, we can include it in the show notes.
Thanks, Gab. And I had the privilege of attending that session, and your staff did an amazing job. I was really impressed. They should be very proud of themselves, but really key information and lots of good discussion starters. So please look that up in the show notes, because they did a great job. And of course, it's a beautiful visual presentation, because we may know the woman who was behind that. For me, the brilliant Dr. G gave our opening keynote, and she talked about the idea that resilience is not a character trait that some of us are born with and others aren't, but that resilience is a series of actions, of steps that we can take ourselves to teach ourselves. And I love that idea. What a great way to teach resiliency to our staff, to let them know that it's tackleable. I'm not sure if that's a word, but you know what I mean. So we've talked many times on Camp Code about all the stress our staff are under. And of course, Dr. G talked about all the added stress that we've all gone through in 2020. But she really sparked my interest when she shared with us the idea of reframing our understanding of stress to try to see it not as a toxin, but as a tool. So an energy which can help us to make some choices, which can lead us to grow through a change and come closer to who we want to be. And I love that concept, to use stress to help us make some good choices. She also shared her 7-step resilience cycle, which I think would be a really great tool to help teach resiliency skills to our staff, who in turn, of course, can teach it to their campers. So in her cycle, you start first with a change, something that creates a loss, whatever that may be. But it's usually something that gives us a little bit of stress, different, obviously, pinpoints of stress, but which can then lead to distrust of a person or a situation, and then to discomfort, which we've all been there. But this is sometimes where I find we get stuck in the cycle, is in our discomfort of a situation. So the rest of Dr. G's cycle moves us forward. So step 4 was choice. Step 5 was engagement. 6 was reunification. And then we're back to change. So it's all circular. So this is a long day for me. Cyclical. Thank you. So we're talking about like change, loss, distrust, comfort, choice, engagement, reunification, and change. And I know I said a whole lot of words there, but we will post the link to that cycle in the show notes so that you can see it. And working through the cycle with different scenarios would be a great teaching tool at staff training. What would these steps look like in each scenario? Why would some of them be easier to see our way through than others? Where might we get stuck at camp as staff? How could we better support one another? A session on building resiliency during staff training would also create time to talk to your staff about feeling 2 different things at the same time, that's normal and that we all do it. So we can feel scared and excited at the same time, or we can feel nervous and brave, or anxious and determined, all at the same time. So talking with our staff about feelings that you can feel at the same time at camp, and getting really specific about situations in which these might occur, like at the climbing wall or in the water or on opening day. Those kinds of conversations with your staff will really sort of open some doors and get them thinking. So having these kinds of discussions during training can also help folks gain insight into what others may be feeling when stressful moments occur for them. And then coupled with that resilience cycle, you can help staff learn to move forward in these stressful moments, big and small. Dr. G also talked about the idea of doing an exercise with your staff about uncomfortable versus unsafe. So getting your staff to list all of the things you do at camp that are uncomfortable and all those that are unsafe. And of course, if you create a Venn diagram, there will be ones that overlap. But having that discussion with them about how to help campers see the difference and how to work through them both. So for example, if something's unsafe, what do we do about it at camp? Do we choose not to do it, and why? Or do we have protocols and procedures in place to do that activity safely? I think there can also be great discussion around uncomfortable. What does that look like, sound like, feel like, and how do we move ourselves and our campers forward through that? So big thanks to Dr. G for all that good info and encouragement to work through our stress. So now, before we move on to round 2, we have an ad from one of our sponsors. Ruby, it's time for the ad read.
No,
So,
so we don't have one this week.
oh, so what do we do?
Well, we start groveling and saying things like the following: Hey, listeners, we need your help to keep offering you our time, energy, and ideas. We need some financial support. Even though we offer our podcasts for free, they aren't cheap to make. If you know of local or camp adjacent businesses who want to increase their reach across the camp industry, we would love to talk to them about becoming an advertiser or sponsor for one of our shows. Go Camp Pro podcasts offer affordable and highly targeted marketing campaigns across our podcasting network. Maybe you run a side hustle Etsy business or have a vendor that you really love. We'd love to chat. Let's be real. Everybody's looking for creative income sources this year, and we at Camp Code love being connectors to help make that happen. Help us connect great companies to the folks who need their products.
And if listeners know companies who may be interested, who should they reach out to?
Email Matt at gocamp.pro. That's Matt, 2 T's, Matt at gocamp.pro. And our wonderfully fantastic executive producer of podcasts, Matt Hansberger, will be in touch.
So thanks for the ad. And we are now back to round 2. So Ruby, can you start us off with something else you learned at the Women in Camp Summit?
Sure can. I learned about the terminology institutional camping or institutional recreation and recreation and recreation camping. And so this came in conversations with the folks who were part of our Women of Color in Camp showcase. And we had 4 women, and we had a panel discussion hosted by the women of S'more Melanin. And it was interesting in talking about the lead up coming into the summit and kind of goals and what that session was going to look like. This was a concept that kept coming up. And truthfully, this was a concept I had never really thought much about. And that there are that is terminology that is not uncommon, I would say, outside of white culture. Like that there are folks who are talking about, and specifically people of color, talking about the difference between like going out camping with some friends and going out camping as an organized group. And that those are kind of 2 different spaces that we tend to see a lot of people of color working in the recreation field, and they may be operating on these 2 different levels of programming. And so it was just terminology that I was like, oh, there's another example of white privilege. Like camping is camping, like we just go out and we play in the woods. And in a lot of ways, like that was a message that was heard in that Women of Color in Camp showcase, was like, the woods is for everybody. Everybody should be able to go there. But my experience compared to the folks on the panel, very different in some ways as well. So again, I encourage you to look into that, dig into that a little bit. And I, again, just love, and I'm so grateful for the Women in Camp Summit for offering space for vulnerable conversations and for the opportunity for someone to say like, oh yeah, honey, there's a lot you don't know. And that is said with grace and love, and with invitations to learn more and invitations to go learn more on my own. And just really grateful for that. And that panel was a highlight for me. I'm full of gratitude for the women who took part in that and shared their stories, and for everyone who attended as well.
Thanks, Ruby. I'm sure that was a highlight for everybody. It was a really great hour and 15 minutes. We all learned a lot, and it was a really special experience. Gabs, what else have you got?
I just want to echo also the Women of Color in Camp showcase, and how generous they were in sharing their knowledge and information and experiences, and also how committed they are in camp and getting people outdoors and getting people into camping. And one of the conversations that we had behind closed doors before we started, we talked about camp magic. And this is something that was brought up in another session at the Women in Camp Summit, this idea about camp magic, and that camp magic isn't available to everybody. Not everybody experiences quote unquote camp magic, and that this is really important if you're a camp professional, to acknowledge that your organization that there can be some wonderful moments, but those moments don't necessarily apply to everybody. And what I really loved from that conversation was that that these women want to create a Camp Magic 2.0, which is an inclusive space for all. And we need to do that. We need to acknowledge that we're not inclusive as an industry. And I really learned from this other session about being intentional, making sure that your mission statement is lined up, which is something that we talk about all the time, and being transparent that we have a common goal on staff to work towards creating a safer space. But that we need to be careful when we say at camp, well, it's Camp Magic. Help your staff define what led to those magical moments. What were the intentional pieces behind, those steps and those experiences for those campers and staff members? Help them break down, how do we create safer spaces? We want to use it in a positive way when staff members or campers are saying that was Camp Magic, but especially staff members, and saying, well, what led to this? And get them to reverse engineer, as Beth says, and look at those different steps. And I really, I'm starting to see a shift in the language that camps are using, and an intentionality behind that, and helping your staff members become intentional and part of those conversations. I think is vital to creating a safer space for everybody. So for me, just linking to what Ruby was talking about in the session that I heard about Camp Magic at the Women in Camp Summit, I thought to myself, yes, I need to help my staff reverse engineer these experiences and break it down so that they can understand that that there's work that goes into, an intentionality that goes into creating safe space. And when we don't have that intentionality, we're not seeing everybody.
That's great. Thanks, Gab. Appreciate you sharing that. So Ruby and I obviously attended the same session by the brilliant Leslie Keller, who was speaking my language. And
Yes.
I hope you forgive that pun for me, but I love language. And I often talk about how powerful it can be at camp, both in a negative and in a positive way. And it's the reason I'm such a fan of front loading and getting staff's input and having them verbalize their thoughts. Leslie is also passionate about being very intentional to make the best word choices to empower staff and campers. And her session was filled with examples, as Ruby talked about, of ways that we use words to exclude folks and ways that we ignore the effects of our language on others. And she also shared a lot of language to help us dig deeper and truly understand individuals and how they may actually be feeling. So I just want to throw out a couple of examples. She pushed us to think about using terms like historically excluded when dealing with non-white races, to show how much work needs to be done here in North America, particularly, or the phrase racist abuse instead of racism, which shows us often the more violent, intentional, and deeper hurt. And by calling it racist abuse, it also clearly states that it's not up for debate or question. And we discussed the fact that some folks prefer first-person language, while others prefer identity-first language. So we needed to ask the person to whom we are referring what their preferences may be, and that even though we think we're trying to be as inclusive as possible based on all of our reading and our research, that they may actually prefer a different terminology. And again, it was about the individual. She also shared with us the idea about talking with your staff about gender-coded language. So those that are considered stereotypical male, female coded qualities, and to have a discussion on how society tends to see and praise men, for example, for only those perceived masculine qualities. And I think that would be a great discussion, opening activity to delve into gender as social constructs and what that means for your staff and for your campers, and what you can do to create community where everybody feels welcome and accepted for who they are. She certainly gave me a lot to think about and a lot to read and research, including the book, How to Be Anti-Racist, and other resources that, again, we'll put in the show notes that include a great website, which I've sort of taken a deep dive into recently and really am learning a lot, is The Body Is Not an Apology. And it's a super resource for correct terminology and ways to empower our people to have real radical self-love. And her big thing was, we're never too old or too young to learn. And so as youth development professionals, we all need to work hard to create a framework of inclusion supporting conversations and setting the stage for staff to be ready to have those important conversations with kids and with teens. And inclusion means focusing on the individual and centering on their experience and their feelings. So how can we all do that better at camp? Lots to think about and work on. So we're going to hear from each of the hosts one more time before we head to our famous Gabrielle Rail recap. So Ruby, what's your last point?
Well, this wouldn't be a Camp Code podcast if we didn't pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about kind of the organizing side. And
Yes.
who is the woman behind the curtain?
I'm excited.
So I had a revelation during our final keynote that Beth reminded me is true for both of our keynotes. And that is our final keynote was Roseanne St. Aubin. She was a news broadcaster, a journalist for a long time. She worked as a communications director for a big school system. And she really just shared about her story and her life and some impactful moments that happened. And it was a wonderful closing keynote. And there was this point that I was listening to her talk and I was like, oh, she's speaking kind of like a newscaster, like reading from a teleprompter, kind of that same flow and calm and you know, kind of hanging on every word and accenting this. And it was just very much that kind of newscaster flow. And I was like, oh, get right. Well, she did that for a super long time. And then this aha moment of, obviously, people who have some on camera, on TV in particular experience, that is probably going to translate really well to the virtual environment. And let's be real, like we're all trying to figure out, how do we do virtual conferences? How do we do virtual gatherings? How do we do virtual trainings, right? All of those things are things that the camp industry, especially, but everyone in the world is dealing with right now. And it was such a like, obviously this would work, but I didn't articulate it until that moment. And so I think that that's something to consider, is if you're somebody who's organizing a conference, if you're looking for speakers for a training, consider asking, do they have any TV experience? Do they have any journalism experience? How much on-camera experience do they have? And that will give you a sense of, you know, how much experience they have being in front of a camera and being comfortable, because just that comfort in front of the camera can do a lot for making it a more enjoyable experience for the watchers and the learners. And Gabs and I both worked with some of our speakers leading into the Women in Camp Summit. And a lot of times that was the question, is like, how do I take this in-person thing that I'm used to doing and make it virtual? And I think that there is a lot that we can learn from newscasters. I will share a couple that I think of in particular. So one is, if you've ever watched, the evening news or the morning news, whatever works for you, is that it feels like the person is talking directly to you. And so instead of saying, good morning, everybody, I'm so excited to see all of you, right? They say things like, good morning. And it just feels like it's somebody speaking directly to the camera who is the viewer. And it's such, again, language matters. It's such a little language shift. And yet it even like subconsciously has an effect on us of like, oh, they are talking to me, right? Which is really different from being on a Zoom call and feeling invisible. I think about too, that when we are in person, we can use a lot more of our body and our full body to show what we want to accent, right? Like one of the very first presentations I ever did, there was one point in my presentation where I stood on a chair because I was like, this is the most important thing. If you remember nothing else, like listen to this thing. And even if I do this in my little Zoom box, it might have some impact, but it doesn't have the same impact as being in person and seeing that. And so we really have to rely on our volume and our tone and our stretching out our vowels to accent words. And that's something that newscasters do really, really well. They've been coached on that, is how do you point out what the words of emphasis are? It's how they deliver the actual words. So if you're looking at doing virtual presentations and you're like, how can I make this better? How can I make it more engaging? Seriously, like go look up what are some of the tips that they're giving to on-screen journalists and on-camera news people. and practice some of that stuff, and look in your camera and talk to the camera as if you're talking to one person. If you're on the planning side and you're looking for speakers, I would look for folks who have TV experience or a lot of experience presenting online. It goes a long way the more practice that you have. And I would say like the three of us have gotten much better at it over the years, both through podcasting, but also teaching online for several years together. So online personalities, they can make really great keynotes. Obviously, there's other things to consider too, but I think it's a nice box to check.
Thanks, Ruby. All right, Gabs, what's your last one? It's
My
hard
last
to
one.
narrow it down, I know.
My last one is rock, paper, scissors. We had a talent show night, and I'll be very transparent. So games is just not the thing for. I don't love playing games. I don't like participating in games, and I know that's maybe bizarre as a camp director. I play in a different way, but sitting and participating in something just doesn't speak to me. But I went because I'm part of the leadership team and wanted to lend support, and I had a blast. I am so happy that I attended. I'm so happy that I had some friends that were like, "Hey, are you good? I'm so happy to see you that evening." So then I knew I had to go. I was like, "Oh, me too." But I was so happy, and it started off with a game of rock, paper, scissors online, which I'm going to be 100% stealing and using in some of my meetings with my staff, leadership team members. And basically, how it works is you choose somebody on the screen, you make sure that Zoom is on the grid mode. You choose somebody that you're playing against. You don't announce it. You say it in your head, and you play rock, paper, scissors with that person. Now, if they beat you, then you're out. You're no longer playing. And if you win, then you get to continue. You can pick somebody else, and it dwindles down the team. And I think the two, was it Ruby? Was it you and Kate at the end? My goodness, I was
Yes,
like,
yes,
it was like the message board was going wild. It was like, who's gonna win? Oh my goodness, like it felt like an actual match, and it was just really, really, really good fun. And then we had our talent show, which was just a random eclectic group of different talents that were presented to us, and I was glued to the screen. There was everything from a dance, like a funny dance from Kate Taylor, to Colette making coffee, to Kim presenting on the trilogy of Twilight. There was so many different things that were just so fun and enjoyable, and I think we really needed to laugh, and I think we really needed to just have a wonderful evening, and there were so many people that showed up. But I think that as well as the takeaway for me was to try to bring that to your staff that are at home right now, that I know it's hard sometimes to get staff to come to maybe Zoom events, but bring in a couple of people, 5-6 people that can help plan it, know that they have some strong pull on your staff team, so they can be that friend, like my friends that message me saying like, "Can't wait to see you tonight," and get a group together, do a talent show, play a game. Started off with rock, paper, scissors. It was absolutely wonderful and fun, and what a stress reliever as well. I just felt so great after that evening.
Thanks,
to Kate for also totally winning the rock, paper, scissors.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I don't even remember.
Well,
I was just having such a great time. It was such a wonderful event. Yeah.
Thanks, Gab. And I am going to echo exactly what you said. So I learned so much at the summit, so many things that I'm still processing and researching. But one of the things that struck me more than anything during the experience was the fact that even after 9 months of being online, going virtual, sitting in front of a computer screen, people are still willing to gather on Zoom or whatever platform you use to be together, to feel community, to laugh, to learn, to share, to question, to support one another, to feel a part of something special and extraordinary. And we had over 200 women from all over the world register, as Ruby mentioned earlier. We saw keynotes and sessions and evening program playtime filled with women. I couldn't get over how many showed up to coffee time in the afternoon or mentor chats, or who created more opportunities through our conference app to spend hours together after the 10-hour days were over.
Yeah.
We had women tune in, as Gab said, for honestly one of the craziest talent shows I have ever seen, complete with dog tricks, at how to make the best coffee and fancy lattes, as Gab mentioned. And one of my favorites, and Gab already mentioned this too, but a 5-minute tongue-in-cheek PowerPoint presentation. And I'm sure Kim would tell me it wasn't tongue-in-cheek, but on why the Twilight Saga movies are the best films of all time. And as one of the organizers, I kept watching the numbers, and not a single woman left that Zoom room early in the talent show, not one. And it was such a joy to be with other people and to share in something that seemed so familiar to us, like camp. So please don't be afraid to offer your staff an evening, an afternoon, a virtual get together over a weekend, whatever you can manage for them to be together this holiday season, this break from school, this difficult and sometimes seemingly unending stressful time. Having familiar faces to see, listening to one another's trials, tribulations, and successes, and feeling that sense of community and togetherness is so needed. And what we learned was it can still be incredibly powerful, even virtually. So please make a plan, reach out, get them together in December or in the new year or monthly as you move forward to camp, whatever works for your people. And do your best to make it as much like camp as you can, with traditions and your sense of silliness or gratitude or a sense of purpose. And your people will thank you more than you can imagine. And in all of the conversations that I had during and post summit, that's what people told me, was that sense of community and being together was what really did it for them. And it was something they really needed. So don't let the fact that we can't be together in person stop you from trying to gather your staff together and do something amazing. And now we have come to the time in the show where we get Gabs to do the recap.
Recap. All right. Okay. So I'm going to start with resources, because we have a couple of great resources that you'll find in the show notes. The resiliency cycle. I'll just say there is a cycle. There's parts of the cycle. Do I remember the cycle? No, but that's why we have a document for you. White privilege. We also have that presentation. If you're a reader, or maybe somebody likes to listen to things on Audible, how to be an anti-racist, as well as check out the website, The Body Is Not an Apology. That is so true. Just that title. Maybe we'll learn something from that. I also just want to add in a little thing from Dr. Deb. You can have two feelings at once, which blows my staff mind when I say both things are true and they can exist in you. You're not Tinkerbell, one feeling at a time. You're actually an involved individual that has multiple feelings, and that can be confusing and conflicting. Leslie Keller is the star of our show of our hearts, the apple of our eye. I also enjoyed her. I thought she was amazing. And Live, Love, Equity. Want to check that out and make sure that we're using the appropriate language at camp. And language is always evolving. It's always shifting. So we always have to keep learning, and maybe, be nice to a friend like Beth, who's great with language, so she can help you in teaching those things to you. The Women of Color in Camp Showcase was also a massive highlight. Institutionalized camping versus recreation camping is one of the languages that we learned, and that's important to evaluate and look at, but also language such as historically excluded, racist abuse, gender coded language. Again, we have a lot of work at camp, but as we have talked about before, we can be the role models to other industries. So that's why we're doing this hard work, because we're amazing. And let's not forget that the Smore Mendelin group, Brianna Mitchell and Michaela Ivey, Magic 2.0. Let's get staff members to reverse engineer why magic worked and how can we apply it in different places. Make them part of the problem solving, and you're going to be building better staff for that. And lastly, community. Online stuff is scary. Sometimes it feels boring, but the Women in Camp Summit showed us and showed to the participants that when you have camp people in a space and it is intentional, you can almost feel, the weight of the world just dripping off of your shoulders. And for a moment, just laughing with friends is so important. So if you have that opportunity to do that with your staff members, make it happen, bring them in, get people to help you so you don't do it by yourself, and that the weight is just a little bit lighter and you're making other people's days just a little bit happier.
Thanks, Gab. And I think we have a new sticker.
Yes.
You are not Tinkerbell. I think that's our new sticker.
Right.
I like it.
Yeah.
All right. And before we wrap up with our best practice from Ruby this week, here's how folks can connect with us and get involved in the conversation. So join us by using the hashtag camp code and let us know the topics you'd like us to discuss, any guests you recommend that we talk to, great leadership training tips that you have to share with us. We would love to hear from you. We are all about sharing in this industry. And if you found this podcast to be useful, we would love it if you could leave us a rating and a review in iTunes. And you can do that by going to camphacker.tv/cc_iTunes, or you can tweet your love of the show by going to camphacker.tv/campcodelove, because your feedback helps the show keep on going. And Ruby, do we have any feedback this week?
We still don't have any new reviews. So I need all of you all to get on over to your podcasting app and leave a rating and review. Let us know you're listening. Look, leaving reviews may feel like it's no big thing, but it really does help get our show to new listeners and the folks who need it most. So I'm going to up the ante here. The next person, that's right, the next person that leaves us a rating and review is going to get one of these limited edition exclusive Women in Camp Summit pint glass. It will not come with the water. It will be empty. Shipping to anywhere in North America, because the mail system's a little weird right now, but I'll anywhere in North America, preferably a good review, but like you do you, boo. So first person who gets out there and gives us a rating and review, because we need some new ones, y'all. You get a Women in Camp Summit pint glass. I'll send it over to you. As Gab would say, this is très cool. So you can go to the links that Beth mentioned. You can go to ratethispodcast.com/camp code. That'll get you started. The race is on. It's starting now. Send me an email once you send it so I can make sure I can get in touch with you and get you your pint glass. Back to you, Beth.
Awesome. And it would be totally worth it. They are pretty special.
Yeah.
So here's how you can get in touch with each one of us individually. Ruby.
You can email me, ruby@rubyoutdoors.com. You can find me on Instagram. And currently, while we're recording the show, I'm quarantining, so you can keep highlights of what's going on with that. It's exciting. And you can find me on Twitter, RubyLynn85.
Thanks, Ruby. And please know Ruby is not unwell. That's not why she's quarantining.
It's true.
Gabs.
You can follow me and get in touch with me on Instagram, Gabrielle Rail with 2 L's. And you can check out where I work at waro.com, OUAREAU.com. And there's an email there too. And if you send an email there, that person, whoever checks it, Alexandre, will send it to me. So there you go.
Great. Thank you. And you can check out where I work at gocamp.pro. Email me directly at beth@gocamp.pro. Or you can find me at topaz_faye. And Ruby, our next podcast is...
Hat tip to Gabs for suggesting this topic. I think it's really smart. So our next week, we are going to be talking about the silent summer, training staff after a gap in operation.
Exciting. I'm looking forward to that one. Our final segment on each podcast, as you know, is a best practice for leadership training. And again, we would love to hear some of your most memorable moments or most effective tips. And you can tell us what they are using that hashtag camp code. And this week, Ruby has our best practice.
So we mentioned earlier that at the end of the Women in Camp Summit, we had our 2 days together with our women. And then on Friday, we had an Allies event, the Becoming Allies event, supporting women in camp. And this is a series that we're launching to continue some of these conversations. We don't want to just have these conversations once a year, and we also don't want them to be just conversations. So we wanted to get some more work done on becoming allies for all sorts of populations that that need allies right now so that we can work towards more equitable workspaces and worlds. So fortunately, we had 3 guys who were fantastic, who led our Becoming Allies Supporting Women in Camp session on Friday, and really opened up the door for some great conversations. I've even talked to a few women who went back and had conversations in their organizations, and some of the results of that, and how, you know, it's not all easy peasy, but we're working towards a better future. But one of the tools that they talked about that I really liked was the idea of the man box. And that may sound a little dirty, to get your mind out of the gutter. Come on now. And they talked about, you know, what does society and what does culture tell us it means to be a man? And so we're going to put those things inside the man box, and we wrote them in. And then we talked about what does culture and society say, you know, is unmanly or not manly. And then comparing those phrases and saying, interesting, some of those are, or many of those are traits that are often used to describe females, and a lot of times it's there's some negative connotation to it. And it was just a really smart visual, and I could see taking that visual, and it's approachable, and it was easy to have some conversation. I credit our folks who led that session with really creating that space. But I love that idea of just kind of, you know, here's the square, here is what we are told. And especially in a Zoom world, like we are living inside of boxes right now. I just so appreciate that visual. And if I had a staff that I was training this summer, I would absolutely be adapting that activity to have some conversation around identity, specifically gender, but I think you could apply it to a lot of different identities, and see where that conversation goes. So that's my best practice today, the man box.
Great. Thanks, Ruby. Well, that wraps things up for today. Camp Code is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network, and you can check out all of our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Stay tuned for our next episode. And from all of us here at Camp Code, thanks for the listening, friends.